On June 26, as Sean Diddy Combs faced the final phase of his federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial, his teenage daughters, Delilah, Jessie, and Chance, entered the courtroom in a powerful show of familial unity. The emotional weight of the moment hung thick in the air as they quietly took their seats, eyes forward, hands occasionally clasped together, their father seated just feet away at the defense table. Their presence added a deeply personal dimension to a case already saturated in high-profile testimony, explicit details, and accusations that span decades of alleged abuse, coercion, and criminal enterprise. The courtroom itself was tightly packed, press, legal aides, family members, and members of the public all bearing witness to what could be one of the most consequential celebrity trials in recent memory. It was the day jurors would hear closing arguments, after weeks of jaw-dropping testimony from alleged victims, former employees, and industry insiders who painted Combs not as a mere artist or entrepreneur, but as the orchestrator of a sprawling criminal operation fueled by power, wealth, and intimidation. In the prosecution's closing arguments, Assistant U.S. Attorney Christy Slavic laid out what she called an empire of fear and control. She accused Combs of operating a decades-long racketeering enterprise that used psychological manipulation, financial control, and physical violence to dominate and exploit women, staff, and even business associates. At the center of her case were two key incidents, one involving singer Cassie Ventura in 2016, and another more recent account from a woman identified as Jane Doe, who described being physically abused, drugged, and trafficked in 2023 and 2024. According to the prosecution, these weren't isolated events, but part of a consistent pattern that defined how Combs interacted with the women in his orbit. He used his fame as a shield, his fortune as a weapon, and his influence to silence anyone who stood in his way, Slavic stated firmly. She urged the jury to see the consistency in the stories, the familiar choreography of manipulation, violence, and cover-up. As these words echoed through the courtroom, the three girls sat silently, but visibly attentive. Their expressions remained neutral for most of the proceedings, but their mere presence spoke volumes. These were not just the daughters of a defendant, they were young women witnessing their father being accused of some of the most serious crimes imaginable. For observers, it was impossible not to wonder what they were feeling: confusion, defiance, fear, or simply love for the man who had raised them. The defense, for its part, rested without calling a single witness, leaning instead on the argument that the government's case was built on exaggeration, consent twisted into coercion, and opportunistic testimony. Defense attorney Aaron Dyer characterized the prosecution's narrative as fictional storytelling, arguing that while Combs may have led an unconventional lifestyle filled with consensual adult relationships, none of it rose to the level of criminal conspiracy or trafficking. He pointed to gaps in timelines, inconsistencies in testimony, and what he claimed were motives rooted in money or revenge. The women, he argued, were not trafficked victims but willing participants who later regretted their involvement. Not every unhealthy relationship is a crime, Dyer said during his remarks, and certainly not every consensual encounter is trafficking. Still, the prosecution hammered its point. These were not just sordid tales of celebrity excess, but calculated acts of violence and coercion. The allegations included everything from beatings and surveillance to hush money and witness intimidation. In one instance, prosecutors claimed Combs paid hotel staff to destroy security footage from the night he allegedly assaulted Cassie. In another, they claimed he manipulated Jane Doe's housing and finances to ensure her dependency on him. The federal case against Combs includes multiple charges under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, a law originally designed to prosecute mob bosses and drug lords. The use of RICO in a case involving a music mogul highlighted the extent to which prosecutors viewed Combs not merely as a man behaving badly, but as the leader of a coordinated criminal enterprise. Witnesses described a culture of silence and complicity among his inner circle, who allegedly helped cover up assaults, paid off potential whistleblowers, and arranged encounters that blurred the lines between parties and abuse. As all this was laid out in court, the presence of Combs' daughters remained a poignant counterpoint. They weren't testifying. They weren't speaking to reporters. They weren't even visibly reacting to the testimonies. Yet their appearance in court was a statement in itself. Whether a symbol of belief in their father's innocence, or a quiet plea for familial connection amid chaos, the image of three teenage girls attending court while jurors heard descriptions of their father's alleged criminal acts was hard to shake. At one point, during a break in proceedings, Combs looked toward them and briefly raised his hand to his heart. One daughter responded with a small nod. In such a charged setting, these gestures took on outsized significance. Observers whispered about what it meant. Was it reassurance, love, regret, or some mix of all three? For a man so publicly curated throughout his career, Combs appeared stripped of all branding in that moment, just a father, facing judgment, in the presence of his children. Courtroom sketch artists later described Combs as trying to make direct eye contact with jurors, even subtly gesturing toward them, a tactic that drew caution from the judge. Some members of the public in attendance reported feeling a mix of sympathy and discomfort. Sympathy for the daughters caught in the crossfire of adult misdeeds, discomfort from the intimacy of the details and the contrast between the family image and the alleged behavior. What's striking about June 26 is that it was more than a procedural date. It became a convergence of all elements in this high-profile trial: emotion, evidence, power, denial, and support. The defense was preparing to deliver their own closing arguments, and the jury would soon begin deliberations. There was no certainty in how long the verdict might take, nor in how the jury would interpret the deeply complicated narrative presented to them. But one thing was clear: the presence of Delilah, Jesse, and Chance made this moment unforgettable. Their decision to attend, whether guided by their own will or at the urging of family, offered the public a glimpse into the human cost of scandal and litigation. For all the money, fame, and headlines surrounding Sean Combs, his case is now intersected with something far more intimate: the hearts and minds of his children, who are old enough to understand, but young enough to still hope. In the end, what matters to the jury will be the law, its definitions of coercion, trafficking, enterprise, and culpability. But outside the courtroom, in the court of public opinion and in the quiet recesses of memory, the image of three daughters walking into court to stand behind their father will remain one of the most defining visuals of this extraordinary trial. It was a moment that encapsulated both the fragility of family and the far-reaching consequences of fame misused, all under the blinding glare of justice.